What's good, you guys? Thanks for tuning in. This is Goldinum Beats. Welcome back to another video. And in this video, I'm going to mix this German hip-hop beat from scratch. So this is a beat from one of my subscribers. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it, right? Do you need FL Studio beat mixing, vocal mixing, and audio mastering presets to help you improve your mixes? Then check out Goldinum Beats on Patreon. Goldinum Beats create FL Studio mixing and mastering presets and templates, as well as educational content on Patreon to help serious producers succeed in their music journey. By becoming a patron, you will instantly unlock free access to all exclusive content by Goldinum Beats. The link is down below in the description. So the first thing I did with this beat was to color code my channels as well as the tracks on the playlist, because I like my projects to look nice visually as well. So yeah, the next thing I'm going to do is to route these channels to the mixer. So I'm going to select one channel until all channels are selected like this. So now I'm going to go to the mixer and select insert one. So now I'm going to use the shortcut Control Shift and L, and all these channels will then be routed to the mixer, right? So this is what the beat sounds like. So the first thing I'm going to do is to set the gain for each channel to peak at minus 12 dB, right? So let me quickly explain to you the difference between gain and volume. When we talk about input signal, we use the term gain, and gain is the input signal coming from a channel or amp. For example, like on the channel rack we have these channels right here. So the signal coming from the channel into the mixer will be our input signal, and when we talk about input signal we use the term gain. And when we set the final output levels, we use the term volume, alright? So these are the volume faders, and with these we can control the loudness. So with volume you control the loudness, and with gain, which is the input signal, you control the tone of each channel. So what I'm going to do next is to set the input gain for each channel. So I'm gonna solo the kick, and let's start with the kick, and then I'm going to use the channel volume to set the input levels to peak at minus 12 dB, right? So we're gonna set the gain for each channel. So what I'm also going to do is to rebalance these samples using the channel panning. So let's start with the kick. Alright, so let me slightly pan it to the left. Alright, so now I have a more balanced incoming signal. So now I'm going to set the input gain to peak at minus 12 dB. So you can use the dB meter to analyze the signal to see where the level of each channel peak. Alright, so it's just below minus 12 dB. Let me turn it up just a little more. So now it peak at minus 12 dB, alright? So let's go to the snare. So the snare looks nice and balanced. So I'm gonna turn down the channel volume for the snare, or for the input signal of the snare to peak at minus 12 dB. Let's turn it down more. So it peak at minus 12 dB. So you have to do this with all your channels to make sure you have the correct incoming signal, alright? So you have to make sure that all channels have an incoming signal of minus 12 dB. So let me set the input gain for the hi-hat. Alright, so the hi-hat peak at minus 33 dB. So even if you turn up the channel volume to its maximum value, it will not reach minus 12 dB. It will peak at minus 27 dB. So in this case, you need to go to Effects Target and just turn up the boost parameter. Right, so now it will peak at minus 12 dB. So usually I would edit my samples on the sampler but I'm working with track stems, so I have to clean up the track stems during the mixing stage. So the only thing I'm going to do during the mixing stage is to insert a noise gate first on the mixing chain, just to clean up or deblend some of these track stems. For example, the hi-hat. The hi-hats have like reverb applied to it, so what I'm going to do during the mixing stage is just to go to Goldinum's Everything bundle, and I have a preset called, a picture preset called Goldinum's Drum Sample Cleaner. And here it is. So now you just need to drag and drop it onto the mixer track or into the slots. So now the only thing you need to do is to turn up the drum cleaner parameter. Instant results. So now the drum sample sounds much cleaner. So if I bypass it, you will hear that reverb on the hi-hat, and if I activate it, it will sound much cleaner. So now you can apply your own source to the hi-hat. So that's for the mixing stage, and I will use this when I get there. So let me set the input gain for each channel to peak at -12 dB. So now the input level of each channel peak at -12 dB. So I'm gonna start off by mixing the drums, but first I'm gonna create a drum bus. So I'm gonna route all these drum tracks to an empty mixer track. So let's use insert 20, let's rename it drum bus. Now let's move it to the left. Alright. So now I'm gonna press and hold Control, left click and hold, and move my mouse cursor to the right to select all my drums like this. So now I'm gonna right click on the send arrow of the drum bus and select route to this track only. So now all these tracks will be routed to the bus and will be disconnected from the master channel, and will go through the drum bus first. So this is going to be the final chance to make sure the drum sounds absolutely amazing, and from the drum bus it goes back to the master channel. So I'm going to start off with the main drum elements in the mix, which is the kick, the snare, and the hi-hats as well. Right, so I'm gonna make sure these elements sounds absolutely amazing, and then I'm gonna bring in the rest of the drums. So let's start with the kick. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a hi-hat group. So I'm gonna route both these hi-hats to an empty mixer track. Let me just move this to the left. Let's double click on it, route it to this track only, and then I'm gonna route the group to the bus. Right, so let's rename this, rename it Hats Group. Let's give it like a different color just to separate it, so I can know this is my Hats Group. And let's separate it as well. So these two hi-hats are fighting for a place in the high-end area. So I'm gonna do sidechain compression. Then I will use the sidechain signal of the hi-hat to carve the frequency, or to duck the signal of hi-hat number 2, which is the more busier hi-hats in the mix. But for now, let's start with the kick and the snare. Let me just mute the hi-hats for now. So the first thing I'm going to insert on the kick is an EQ. So I'm just going to give a little boost in the higher frequency range. Alright, so let me just reduce a little bit of the lows. So now I'm going to insert a compressor, so I'm going to use the Fruity limiter. So now I'm going to apply some compression to the kick. So I'm going to use a ratio, let's say, of about 1.5 over 1, and then I'm going to turn the attack to its maximum value, which is, let's say, 1 second, and I'm going to release, leave the release as it is. So now let me reduce it. So now let me turn down the threshold. So it's basically just to roll off some of the fatness of the kick without affecting the transients of the kick. Don't want to take away too much. Let me just turn down the ratio to about 1.3. Let me reset the low shelf. Right, so that sounds nice. So now let me just turn it down to pick up minus 12 dB. Turn down the release as well. Let's see. Let's make it a little bit longer. Alright, let's leave it right there. Alright, so the kick sounds nice. Let's go to the snare. Let's open up the snare a little. So we're just going to give it a slight boost in the higher frequency range. Alright, so I'm going to use a high pass filter just to filter out some lower frequencies. So that's basically all I'm going to do for the snare. So I'm just going to apply some reverb to that snare. So I'm going to go to the presets, Goldinum's Everything Bundle beat mixing presets, and I'm going to go to reverb presets, clap snare verb. So let's use one of these presets. Alright, so that sounds nice. Let me just choose another one. Let's see. Alright, so this one have a longer decay, so I'm gonna remove this one and let's use the first one for the snare. Let's reduce it a little. Right, so that sounds absolutely amazing. So on the hi-hats, like I said, I'm gonna insert my picture preset, which is also included in Goldinum's Everything bundle, called Goldinum's Drum Sample Cleaner. So I'm gonna put Drum Sample Cleaner on both these tracks, which is hi-hat 1 and hi-hat 2. So let me just copy it, save preset as, and just paste it on this hi-hat as well. So let's turn up the drum cleaner parameter. We mute this one first. So let's turn up this drums cleaner parameter for this one as well, to clean up this hi-hat as well. So now this sample or this stem sounds nice and clean. So now I'm gonna do sidechain compression to make space for the first hi-hat in the buzzy hi-hat, which is hi-hat 2. So I'm gonna use sidechain compression. So I'm gonna right click on, so I'm gonna select hi-hat 1, right click on the same arrow and select sidechain to this track. So on the buzzy hi-hat, I'm going to insert the fruity limiter. I'm going to right click on sidechain and select hi-hat. So now I'm going to turn up the ratio all to its maximum value, which is 20.0/1, and just turn down the threshold. Let's turn down the release. So when you look at the heads group, you won't see any inconsistency in level when these two heads overlap each other. But if I deactivate the fruity limiter, the level of the heads will go from -12 dB to, I don't know where, let's see, all the way up to -6 dB, right? So this is basically just to make space for the first hi-hat in the buzzier hi-hats, right? So this is basically just to make sure every hi-hat, even though there's two in the mix, have its place in the higher frequency range, right? So now I'm gonna go to the presets, beat mixing presets included in Goldinum's Everything bundle. Go to hi-hats and use one of these presets and just drag and drop it onto the mix track. There's too much reverb, so let me just dial the mix level down. Right, so let me just turn it down. Turn down the snare as well. Let's turn up the hi-hats. So there's multiple areas in the mix where the snare and the hi-hats are kind of layered. So I don't want to add up to the higher frequencies whenever those two elements are playing together. So I'm going to use a technique called sidechain dynamic EQing, where we'll use the sidechain signal of the snare to carve the frequency of the hi-hats, right? Because I don't want excess of higher frequencies whenever those two elements are playing together. So it's basically just to make space in the higher frequency range so that the higher frequencies of the snare doesn't clash with the hi-hats, and that's basically just to prevent harshness. Oh no, let me use a limiter as well and use sidechain compression. Let me see the snare. Let's sidechain it to the hi-hat group. Sidechain to this track. Limiter. Right click on sidechain and select snare. So what will happen is when the snare hits, it will duck the hi-hat, because I don't want the snare or the hi-hats to add up to the higher frequencies when both of these tracks play together in the mix. Let's play it. Let's turn up the ratio. So now I'm gonna bring in the rest of the drums. Right, let me just turn these tracks down for now. Right, so these two tracks sounds great. As it is, the only thing I'm going to do on the first snap is to shorten the decay of the reverb using a noise gate. So we're going to insert it from the lambda. Let's turn it up the threshold of the noise gate, turn the gain down. Let's do this. This is basically just to shorten the decay of the reverb that's already applied to the snap. Let me just deactivate it. And when I activate it, the decay will be much shorter. Right, so let me just bend this 50% to the left. And this one 50% to the right. So now let's bring both down. So when you bend your tracks, a nice way to check if everything sounds great is to turn the separation parameter on the master channel all the way to the right to merge the signal, just to make sure the bent tracks are still audible and sounds great in the mix. And that sounds absolutely amazing, right? So now let's bring in the rest of the drums. Let me shape the cymbal. Let me turn all off. Now let's use a high pass filter. So now I'm gonna reduce this frequency right here and boost different frequencies just to separate it from the hi-hats. Alright, so let's let's use one of my presets for the tambourine. Beat mixing presets, percussion. Let's use tambourine spaced. so the tom have a lot of muddiness. Right, so let me just insert a noise gate just to reduce the bleeding of the tom by using a noise gate. So let's turn it up and turn down the gain. So now I'm gonna play around with the release. Let's turn it down. Alright, so now I'm gonna turn up the release. So let me just deactivate it. Right, so the bleeding will add up to the muddiness of the mix, so it's best to get rid of the bleeding, just to clean up that area of the frequency range, so that it doesn't add up to that problematic frequencies in your mix. Right, and that sounds nice and clean. So let's activate everything, turn it down, and set the final output level for the tom. Alright, so let me insert an EQ on the drop. Let's turn off all bands. Let me see where the drop is. It's in this area right here. So I'm going to remove the lower frequencies using high pass filter. And a little bit of high frequencies as well. Alright, so I'm going to turn it all the way up to 20 kilohertz, and then I'm just going to turn up at the Q or the bandwidth. So now I'm going to apply a little bit of reverb just to give it this sense of space. Alright, so let's turn down the decay to about 1 second. Let's leave it at 1.5. And that sounds nice, so let's turn it down. So now the drums are basically mixed, so I'm gonna go to the drum bus. So on the drum bus, I'm gonna go to Goldinum's Everything Bundle once again, and then I'm gonna use a picture preset called Drum Bus EQ. I think I named it Drum Bus EQ, yeah. Alright, so let's drag and drop it onto the drum bus track, and this is what it looks like. So let's play the drums, give it a little bit of presence. So now I'm gonna apply some compression. I'm gonna use a ratio, let's say, of about 4.0. And then I'm going to use an attack of about 20 milliseconds. No, let's use an attack of about 10 milliseconds. And a release, let's use a very short release. Let's use about 80 milliseconds. And let's see how it reacts to the signal. So let's turn down the threshold. Let me use an attack of about 1 millisecond. Let's turn up the threshold. Let's use a different preset for the tom. Go to beat mixing presets, percussion, punch and click, bring out tom. Let's use this one. Let's see. Limiter. Let's turn up the threshold of the noise gate. Let's turn it down and bring it in. Let me just remove the expander. And that sounds much nicer. So now I'm gonna add a little bit of distortion. So I'm gonna use the really fast distortion just to add a little bit of dirt to the drums. So let me turn down the threshold. So now I'm gonna blend in that signal using the mix parameter. So now I'm going to insert Goldinum's clipper, and I'm going to insert Goldinum's clipper just so that I can have a consistent level throughout the mix. So I'm going to clip on my drum bass. So I'm going to go to Goldinum's Everything bundle once again, picture presets, and use Goldinum's clipper and just drag it onto the mixer track. So let's see where the drums peak mostly. So it's just below -6 dB. So I'm just gonna turn down the clipper. Push it to -6 dB. And this is what a drum bass sounds like without drum bass processing. With drum bass processing. Alright, so now I'm gonna bring in another main element, which is the bass. So let's activate the bass. Let's move the bass a little bit to the left like this. So let's use one of my 808 bass presets. Let's go to bass, 808 bass. Let's just drag and drop it onto this mix track. Let's turn down the 808. Turn down the tom a little. So now I'm gonna make space for the kick in the 808 bass. So I'm going to use a technique called Sidechain dynamic EQing. So I'm going to insert pitcher. Within pitcher, I'm going to insert the Fruity Parametric EQ tool. So now let's see which frequencies I can carve to make space for the kick. So I'm going to leave it just like this. So now I'm going to insert the Fruity P controller and the Fruity XY controller. Right, so the Fruity XY controller is not a necessity, but I like to use the Fruity XY controller because it reacts much faster to the sidechain signal instead of linking the parameter straight with the Fruity Peak controller. So now I'm gonna go to the kick, select the kick, right click on the 808 bass, on the center of the 808 bass, and select sidechain to this track. So now I'm gonna go back to the 808 bass, right click on from FL Studio, outputs, audio, and select kick. So now I'm gonna use the sidechain signal of the kick to carve the frequency of the bass using band level 1. So now let's deactivate the main output. Right click on the Fruity P controller, outputs, controllers, and select peak. On the Fruity XY controller, I'm going to right click on it, go to inputs, parameters, X level, right click on it once again, outputs, controllers, and select X. Right, so we're going to use band level 1 on the main EQ. So we're going to right click on it, go to inputs, parameters, and select band level 1. So now you need to link these points, right? So now I'm going to open the Fruity XY controller. So the only thing I'm going to do in the Fruity XY controller is just to turn up the speed to its maximum value, so that the main EQ, band level 1 on the main EQ can instantly react to the sidechain signal, which is the kick. So now I'm going to open the Fruity P controller as well as the main EQ. So by default, the level will be at 0.0 dB. So I'm going to right click on it, copy the value, and just paste it on the base. So let's reset the volume, and then I'm going to set the amount of reduction by turning the peak amount or the volume parameter to the left. So this is basically just to make space for the kick in the lower frequency range, so that the kick and bass doesn't clash or doesn't fight each other for a spot in the lower frequency range, right? So this will give you a much cleaner and punchier sounding low end. And that sounds absolutely amazing. So I'm gonna bring in another main element, which is the guitar. Right, so I'm gonna go to Goldinum's beat mixing presets and use one of my guitar presets. Let's use ambient shine. Let's just drag and drop it onto the mix track, and this is what it will sound like. Let's just reduce the reverb a little by 30%. So you can also use the sidechain signal of the drum bass to carve the frequency of the guitar, just so that the drums stays a little bit up front in the mix, and make the guitar duck a little bit, just so everything can sound nice and structured, right? So what I'm going to do is to select the drum bass, right click on the guitar, and select sidechain to this track. So on the guitar, I'm going to insert the preset called Space Maker. Alright, so this is going to be, or this is my updated version of Space Maker. So I'm gonna go to Goldinum's Everything bundle, patch of presets, mixing and mastering patches, and look for Space Maker. Right, so here it is, version 2.0, and let's just drag and drop it onto the guitar. So now I'm going to click on map, and this is going to be my sidechain signal, and I'm going to use the drum bass as my sidechain signal. So I'm going to right click on from FL Studio, outputs, audio, and select drum bass and link it to the sidechain signal. So now I can go back to service. Right, so now you can just turn up the reduction level to set the amount of reduction for each frequency band, or for each band. Right, so let's play it. That sounds absolutely amazing. So now I'm gonna bring in the rest of the tracks, which is these vocal samples. So let's insert this one first. Alright, so this sample sounds great as it is, so I'm just gonna turn it down and bring it in. Alright, so that sounds nice. Let's use this one, or let's activate this one, and let's set the volume for this one as well. And that sounds absolutely amazing. So the mix is basically done. So my mix peaked between -6 and -3 dB. So I'm gonna use some of my mastering presets. So once again, I'm gonna go to Goldinum's Everything bundle and choose one of these mastering presets and just drag and drop it onto the master channel. Let's see which one I can use for this. Let's use this one. Use a different mastering preset. Mastering preset up front. Let's see if it brings the mix up front. My CPU is crying for help right now. But anyway, let's use a different preset. Let's use analog flavor. And that sounds absolutely amazing. So this track is mixed and mastered, right? So this song is out and available on Spotify, iTunes and Apple Play, and the song is called Sommernacht. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, but it's a song by Jessy and it's a great song. So the link is down below in the description. Go and check it out. This is Goldinum Beats. Thanks for watching. God bless.